Okay, again, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Princeton Preservation Group's virtual program. My name is Melissa Ziobro. I am the Director of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch, New Jersey, and the curator of the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music there. I also assist with the Princeton Preservation Group virtual program. So I just wanted to say hi real quick and let you know if you have any tech issues throughout the event, just reach out to me in the chat and I will do whatever I can to assist you. Okay, with that brief announcement, I will turn things over to Gary Soretsky, longtime Monmouth County archivist, Rutgers internship program coordinator, and many, many other hats. But Gary here tonight is wearing his Princeton Preservation Group hat. So take it away, Gary.
Thank you, Melissa. Welcome, everyone. I'll just say a few words about the Princeton Preservation Group for those of you unfamiliar with it. I'm currently the president. Tim Corliss, who is on this meeting, is the vice president. And we've been meeting for a little over 20 years, generally 4 times a year. Our first meeting was presented by Ron Becker, who is here with us today, I'm pleased to say. And he talked about the shelving collapse at Rutgers in the early 80s. And we've had meetings about disasters of all sorts because that's a preservation topic. But we've had meetings on all sorts of topics related to preservation. Anything that is about the preservation of cultural materials is fair game for us. So we've done books, manuscripts, photographs, furniture, carpets, Lucy the Elephant, historic districts, cemeteries, and many other topics, which are listed on our website. There's a list of all the prior meetings there, princetonpreservation.org. All our meetings are free to attend, but if you want to be a member, our dues are $5 a year. That gets you on the mailing list. And this Saturday, we're having our members only garden party, and look forward to seeing some of you there. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Lynne Calamia. Dr. Calamia got her bachelor's at Stony Brook, where she majored in history and women's studies. And then she went to Penn State, where she got her MA and PhD in American studies, and also acquired valuable archival experience. Subsequently, she became the executive director of the Art Street Meeting House in Philadelphia. And now she is the executive director at the Roebling Museum. Welcome, Lynne, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say this evening.
Great, and thanks for having me, you guys. So I want to say first and foremost that this is going to be a casual talk. I look forward to hearing feedback from everyone who's here. So the Q&A, I hope, is pretty lively at the end. And I guess the overall of, the overarching theme of this presentation, sorry, I forget that I'm not the host and I'm trying to let people in the waiting room from the waiting room. I think Melissa's handling that. So the overall, I'm going to talk about Roebling because we're still a hidden gem. Not a lot of people have been to the Roebling Museum. I feel like maybe some of you guys have. Then we're going to talk about our collection, and then sort of my vision for it and where we're heading and some of the collecting adventures we've been on. So I do want to give a disclaimer. This is not a presentation about best practices. So for all of you who deeply understand best practices, please turn that part of your brain off, because small museums are a bit of a different ball game in regards to some of these things, especially if you're used to working in an archives or one of the bigger box kind of museums. Maybe this will work. Okay, here we go. So what is Roebling Museum? Again, I said it was a hidden gem. We have been a museum since 2010. We're pretty much a baby museum compared to a lot of the other ones in New Jersey. We are also a historic district, National Register. So the museum was founded by community members in the early 2000s, but in response to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, knocking down the steel mill. So they were seeing their family's history being taken down, and they basically walked up to the gate and said, stop doing that. Let's do something different. Let's at least save some of this. So that took a lot of work. These are people who lived across the street, not people who went to school for museum design, etc. So they had a really great perspective and very personal relationship to the history. So the pictures you see here is the front of the museum. The museum, it's in a historic building. This is where you would have clocked in at the steel mill if you were a steel worker. It's also where you would have gone to your job interviews. The second building, it's all connected as one now. The second building is where the police were. So the police force were paid by the company, and then also the ambulance garage. So all that together is our museum. We have 6 galleries of exhibits. And then the other picture at the top is one of the buildings in the company town. So we have company town is still there. We have over 750 houses. Only one building is missing, which is absolutely amazing for that level of preservation to have taken place in New Jersey on the Delaware River. It's really just amazing that it still exists that way. And then the bottom is a picture from during COVID when we were doing yoga out in our historic mill yard. Some of the locals said, like, the steel workers are rolling in their grave because we were leading yoga classes like right on the historic mill yard where it used to be. Now it's 7 acres with big chunks of machinery, trains, etc. that were in the mill, but now are set up for people to, there's a little path with signage so people can learn more about how steel is made. But also important to mention is that I said small museum. So I'm the full-time executive director. We have a part-time office manager and then a seasonal person who does sort of like tours and front desk kind of stuff. So we are a really small crew, lots of volunteers. But you know, that means no fundraising staff, no collections person, no janitor, no IT, no HR. I do all of those things. I guess we all kind of do all of those things over at Roebling. So when I first started at the museum, that was 2020, right before the world shut down. So I started in February before COVID. I would ask board members and locals and volunteers sort of, you know, what does the Roebling in Roebling Museum mean? Is it the Roebling Company, which you can see at the top with that logo? Is it Roebling the town, the community, or is it Roebling family? And they would say, yes. And that was sort of, to me, like a little bit of a mission statement. But basically, it wasn't really focused on just one thing. We were talking about all of it was the idea. So this map in the center, you can see that's the full mill, the plan for the mill. It's about 200 plus acres, 230 something acres. And then you can also see the outline of the company town with the houses, which is really interesting to look at. All right, so this is a real plain slide here, but this is a CAPES report that we had done by our best friend, Gary. He came out and this says this was 2005. So this is before the museum existed. He went like behind the scenes into the old general store to check out what the collection looked like in those early days. And the collection back then, people had been starting to collect stuff in the 80s. The mill closed in 1974. So in the 80s, then when the EPA came in, they took all the paper that was in the mill buildings and put that together. But basically, Rutgers kind of got to take what they wanted, you know, looking at what was available. And then Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute up in New York, that's where all the Roebling boys trained to be engineers. They got to take what they were interested in. And basically what was left is what the museum's collection was founded with. So in the CAPE study, I'm going to quote from it right now. In addition to the materials related to the business operations of the Roebling Company, the Roebling Historical Society has acquired an unknown but much smaller quantity of material from local residents, such as old photographs and Roebling ephemera, as well as local school records and other manuscripts. So basically, it was mostly company stuff. So I said earlier, it's company, town, and family, but really it's mostly company that we had. We had a couple of, things related to the operation of the town, but not really that much. The other thing we noticed was that the museum being founded by Hungarians and Romanians sort of tilted our collection towards certain demographics. So the Hungarians and Romanians in town were sort of some of the lowest paid laborers in town, which is interesting. Normally what you hear is that a museum has like all the rich people stuff was saved, but not the lower class people. But we started with not too much stuff because there's never too much stuff for this sort of cultural history, but we don't know anything about like the Swedish immigrants who were considered higher status in town, or the people who lived in the mansions. And we definitely didn't have enough about Black history or really women's history. So there's definitely gaps in our collection, but it's difficult sometimes for me to realize that I'm comparing myself in my mind to like bigger archives or museum collections that have been around for so much longer. But this is really pretty good compared to how young we are as an organization. The other thing I like to say is pretty much every day is still a treasure hunt for us. So let's say you work at the Museum of the American Revolution, you're not finding the history in people's attics and basements or on eBay like I am. It's probably going to be real rare for you to come across something at Goodwill that relates to your museum, whereas we have a really peculiar setup at Roebling. So we did a strategic plan right when I started, and this was early days of COVID. You don't have to read all of this. This is just a page on our website. But we wanted to tell the full story of Roebling, and that was the theme of our strategic recovery plan that we put together. So this was just 2020 through 2023, because when we started writing it, we didn't know what life was going to look like, but we knew we might have a little bit of downtime to go through some of the stuff that we hadn't been able to before. So we did a collections audit, which I kind of was just mentioning, where are the gaps in our collection? Where could we add stuff to tell that fuller story? We did a new case study in 2023, which pointed out a lot of things that we could get to work on, and also put it in order of, what should we start with, prioritizing it. And then we have pulled together a new collecting plan based on filling the gaps that we identified. So this is one example. This is just something I threw up on our website, and you can see it says special focus, and we are looking for Black history, Swedish history, women's history, and then anything related to living in a row house, basically, in town. So again, I said the steel mill is gone. Those buildings aren't there, but what do we have? We have this really unique company town. And the houses are made out of brick. They were built to be basically permanent. They were built in 1905, and they are still in really, really good shape. This is a lot of pictures of one individual house on 2nd Avenue. We had an artist do a rendering of it, which you can see shows how it looks today. The other ones you can see more of an open porch, but pretty much you can tell it's the same house when you look at it. But one of the things we've decided to do is shifting to telling the story of Roebling through the eyes of workers. So how are we going to do that? How is that any different than what we have been doing? So the first thing we started to do was walking tours in the company town. This actually became a really good, not tactic, but thing to offer during COVID when we couldn't go into the museum the way that we used to do lectures and stuff like that. We kind of had to be outside. So we started to do research and put together themed walking tours. So one of my board members is a geologist. He did one all about the bricks and where they were made. We did one on the trees in Roebling. We did one like about pretty much everything you can imagine. And they were all really, really interesting. And when we started to talk about the workers, we realized that our visitors it was easier for them to relate to the worker stories than to the Roebling family stories. So it kind of did help us to, figure out what our visitors were interested in. The second thing we did was I tricked the board into buying this house. So this is why you're seeing this very particular picture. So this corner house on 2nd Avenue is directly across from our museum. and we're going to turn it into an amazing historic house museum that you should all come visit. But we are doing all the research, we're doing a preservation plan, we're doing sort of all the things you need to do in order to get to that place. So don't put it on your calendar until like 2028, maybe, if not sooner, if all the grants come through, 2028. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today, though, is, telling the stories of the workers. And, sometimes this is referred to the buzzword of underrepresented history is harder. It's harder to find these stories. I can tell you right now, I have like 18 books on my shelf about the Roebling family building the Brooklyn Bridge and where they're from and whatever, but only like 1.5 about the actual industrial workers in New Jersey. So it's harder to do the research, and a lot of it needs to be done in creative ways, let's say. So I like to say that we collect indirectly and directly. So what you're seeing here is an example of our social media. Our social media is run by one of our board members. We do not have like, a person on staff doing it, but she lived on 7th Avenue in town. So she had a really good connection and great pictures. But one of the things, and I'm calling this indirect, but maybe it's also direct a little bit, semi-direct. So we've just been trying to tell people what we think is history and what we find to be important through our programs and social media. So with this post, it's just a postcard that the company put out bragging about the houses, and it happened to be the house that we've purchased on 2nd Avenue. So we're posting about things we want to see more of to sort of pattern it for people, because we have found that it's very hard for people, regular people, to understand that their family story is historic and important, because it's normally not, these everyday people who get their stories in museums. So we have had to do a lot of work to convince people, like, yes, we want to see the deed to your house. We want to see, your communion photo in front of the house. Like, it's really been a lot of work. And I wish I had some, like, a therapist to help go through this, to help me out. But we're really getting a lot of great feedback. So in this case here, we just posted a picture of the house, and a woman said, my mom grew up on 2nd Avenue, but more towards Riverside. And so you see me responding here, really, does she have any photos? We're collecting as much as we can, yada, yada, yada. And other people see that. Other people are seeing that comment. And hopefully they're telling their friends, oh, Susan, they're looking for this. And then it filters down to the museum. She also tells a really cute story about how her mom used to meet her dad at the entrance every day when he got off work. That stuff is beautiful. Another thing that you guys might be interested in is when we do get items donated to the museum, we have a temporary custody form. So we do have the infrastructure, even though we don't have a collections person. We know enough to know the things that we need to be doing while we're collecting. But in a lot of cases, so let's say somebody passes away who's like a longtime resident, and they don't have kids. The house is just like basically everything's going in a dumpster if we don't take it. We have been able to have family fill out the form, let us take what looks important back to the museum to go through later. But we've also made sure to cover our butts with the right legal forms, etc. And I didn't take a picture of that because I don't think it's interesting to you guys to read. This is another thing. We get sort of like random emails, and it's probably word of mouth, or it's the universe. I don't know, because this woman emailed me like a week ago saying that she's like, oh, my father and grandfather used to live on 2nd Avenue. Our house is on 2nd Avenue, approximately 1920 through the 1970s. I'm looking for information exclusively like 1920s, 30s, 40s. So this is exactly my dream email. She's coming on Saturday. I'm so excited. But she seems to be on the right track with the stuff that we are interested in. So I think she may have heard from someone or have been following along. I asked her if she knew we bought the house, and she said no. So we'll see. Hopefully she brings some good stuff over. This is an example of, so we were chosen by the Smithsonian to co-create an exhibit with them on the theme of work. It's part of their Museums on Main Street program, but a new section of it. So we knew that the theme was going to be work, but we wanted to complicate the idea of work. So instead of it just being like steel worker men with, grease on their overalls, we wanted to talk about all the work that it takes to run a company town. So the mill, but also like the houses, the community resources, the churches, all of it. So we did a lot of relationship building, meeting people, talking to them about the different artifacts they have, and building our collection specifically for this exhibit. But now we have these objects for much longer. But then when we had the exhibit opening, we invited the families, and they stood in front of their families' artifacts, which is really heartwarming and amazing. And like this woman who's over here under the working from home slide, she said, my grandmother would never believe me if I told her she was in an exhibit in a museum. And I think that's 1,000% correct. Her grandmother was a Hungarian immigrant who lived in Roebling. So another wild and wacky idea that I use to get information is ancestry.com. I feel like maybe this is the right crowd to know a lot about ancestry.com, but the picture that you're seeing in the upper left-hand side here, this is one of the only images we have of the Black church that was in Roebling, and something happened. I've heard like whispers that it burned down in 1941. But we really don't know the answers to that. So I'm trying to find more information. So I checked, like the local newspaper is not digitized. We have a hard copy, but it falls apart every time we touch it. So we haven't been able to go through that as much as we'd like to. But I just started to make a family tree of the preacher at the church. And I saw there was this woman named Wanda who had an amazing family tree of this family. So I sent her an email, an ancestry message, and she lives in the area. Her mother, who was born in the row house that they lived in, is still alive. She was born in 1936 or something like that. And we haven't met in person, but we've been emailing back and forth, and she's going to come over. Hopefully, this is really going to help us to learn more about that fuller story of Roebling. And then my absolute favorite, this is an active thing that you guys can all go look up on eBay and buy for me if you want. But one of the things we definitely want more of. So we have a good amount of these badges of workers from the company. But this one's really interesting because this guy is selling his grandfather's stuff. So we know the worker's name. We have his union card. We do not know that much about the union, the fight. There was a big strike. They opened the hoses on the workers, all of that. It's another thing we're trying to learn more about. But I just emailed this guy, Ralphie, and I said, come on, give it to the museum. We'll take care of it. We'll display it. And he said, okay, if nobody wins the auction, I'll come over and give it to you guys. And then no one won the auction, and he keeps relisting it. So I'm working on Ralphie. It's $68, but like that's kind of a lot of money. I'm just hoping to wear him down eventually on that. But this next slide are some things that I have gotten on eBay. So we'll start at the bottom with these toilet rules. So this is a pretty decently sized, it's like 11 by 17-ish. And it is the description for how to clean the bathrooms at the mill. No joke. How did this get saved? This is like the original frame. This was hanging in the hallway by the bathroom in the steel mill. This is the kind of stuff you really don't ever imagine. And it was up on eBay. We got that. This in the center is, you can probably recognize, it's another worker badge, but it's a dog named Brownie. Like, I need to know Brownie's whole life story. He looks like a criminal as far as I can tell with that, with the height in the background. It looks just like a mugshot. And then behind that are a series of books. One of the things we want to know more about is sort of day-to-day life in Roebling throughout the years, especially before like living memory. So we have people, we've done a lot of oral histories, but like we don't really have day-to-day 1920 Roebling or like 1910 Roebling. And we definitely want to know more about women's lives. So, and this is probably going to be the best thing I ever collect in my entire career. It's 44 diaries written by a woman who lived on 8th Avenue. So that's 1916, no, 1914, 1912, something like that, through the 1970s. So that's like how many world wars? That's her. She had 2 kids with midwives and she describes it. That's her cooking dinner. We know what she's cooking for dinner. She writes about the unionization as someone who doesn't work at the mill, but whose husband and son works at the mill. So these things are absolutely priceless and amazing. And they were on eBay, and the guy who was selling them, his account was called Bob's Junk Emporium. I just can't believe that's where women's history goes, but I got it a good deal because no one else wanted them. And absolutely amazing. I don't know what we're going to do with them yet, but maybe I'll write a book. So there's some other things we've got on eBay, like so really being creative, like there are a lot of stamp collectors and coin collectors. So I've gotten some old handwritten envelopes, no letter, but the envelopes with the canceled stamps from people in Romania writing letters to their family in Roebling. So you have sort of the handwriting on the outside, which is really interesting to look at. There's lots of postcards that are Roebling. And we already have a full set of like the art side, but I want to see what people are writing to the workers or what the workers are sending out. So some of that stuff is pretty easily found on eBay. And if you haven't already, I recommend you look up your own towns, see what's on there. But this is the last slide I have for you guys. And it's basically sort of an example of how we've been synthesizing the new things that we've been treasure hunting and the things that we already had with new research to put it all into context. So we already had this worker badge. These are some of the oldest, this design is some of the earliest worker badges. And you can kind of tell from the photographer, like the paper that the print is on. And Gary, you should come and really look closely at these to help me date them. But so we don't know who this woman is. We just have her image there. But then I was able to convince a local guy in town to donate all of these worker records. So this big yellow card, these are the employee records from about 1919 through 1945. We got 15,000 of them. Some guy had in his garage for 40 years since the mill closed. And just by looking at this one, you can probably see why they're so important. But the backside says where they worked at the mill, for how long, did they get a pension? There's even like accidents, so like health stuff on the other side. Really, really amazing. And something that I think about for outreach to other, historic sites and research folks is here it says employer, but that's actually previous employer on this side on the front. So we have, it'll say like Trenton Potteries. It'll say all these other companies where those worker papers haven't been retained because normally these get thrown away. They don't last. So we could actually help other people who are doing research, especially locally in the region, by looking at these. So we had the badge, we got the records in 2021, but then we've been doing some research. There's lots of like African-American history newspapers that have recently been digitized. And one of the best parts about having a seasonal part-time college student with credentials is that we can really dig into some of these databases that, people who are not affiliated with universities really have trouble getting into. So this newspaper article at the bottom corner, it's a society column. I'm so excited. It's a society column written by a woman who lived at 67 Railroad Avenue. That's in the company town. And she's a Black woman who talks about the comings and goings of the entire Black community in Roebling. She's naming names. She's saying like they had a card party. They went to the dance. They went to the general store. And it's absolutely amazing. This is from the 1930s. So it's really, we hadn't had that before. It's the kind of thing was published in Baltimore, it wouldn't have been like published in Roebling, so it wouldn't have really caught our eye previously. But so we've been working, this stuff takes so much time. What I've described is like relationship building, which takes a lot of time to build the trust for people to really want to give you their family's heirlooms. But then also to sort of start to do the context bit and to add the additional research. So we're absolutely in the middle of all of it. We're learning new stuff every day. And I would love to answer some questions, have a conversation. And if any of you guys have ever seen Roebling stuff anywhere else, let me know because I want to visit.
All right. Well, that was wonderful. My gosh, I don't know what I found the most fascinating. The dogs ID tag, the 15,000 employee cards. I mean, that was great. Thank you so much, Lynn. Gary, shall I just open it up to questions?
Sure.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you would like, or if you would like to type your question in the chat, I'd be happy to read it for you. So who wants to go first? Maybe while you're looking for your mute button or oh, somebody unmuted. Go ahead.
Do you have any evidence of the cars that the Roebling family built?
Yes, so the Mercer cars, one of our previous board members has one, so he is deep in the community because I think he has told me that there's like 60 that are operational on the planet Earth. So those guys all know each other, including like Jay Leno has one. There's a car museum in South Philly that has one. And back in, I think it was 2008, they did a reunion to bring together all of the Mercer cars. And these are like race cars from like the 19-teens, 1920s. So they are very eye-catching when you see them coming down the street. And they did a parade. You guys might know Clifford Zink. He wrote a book about the cars. So they are definitely regionally famous, and then also car guys go nuts. Every year we have a car show basically because of their connection to this car. And there's always at least one Mercer car at our car show. If you're interested in seeing one, you should come by. But a different answer to that question is some of these employee records say Mercer Auto Company. So these people are working in the Mercer Auto shop and then coming to work at Roebling and then going back and forth because their shop was in the Trenton area. So that's they don't know too much about the mechanics, but there's a little bit more coming out from these records, which is great.
Lynn, are there still people living in Roebling who work for the Roebling company?
Absolutely.
Well, how many are there at this point?
Well, so one of the things, like, every time I write a grant application, they ask me to define our community because that's always a question now. And what I usually say is that our community is the people who physically live in the houses today. Like I mentioned, my board chair was joining us. She lives in one of the company townhouses on 6th Avenue. Her great grandfather worked at the mill. So there's like a lineage, there's connections that way. We just had our steel mill street fair a couple weeks back, and so many people came in and said, I worked here in the 70s. So that's like the mill closed in 74. So the only people who really come in and say I worked at the mill are from sort of that vintage, which is when things were slowing down across America with steel mills and heavy industry like that. But they remember where things were. I have like really boring questions for them, like what did the bathrooms look like? What front door did you use? Where did you park your cars? And they are really super helpful. And in a lot of cases, their fathers also worked at the mill, so there's lots of connections. And we're really glad when people come to museum with that story. I'm sure they have something similar up at the Bethlehem Museum, the Museum of Industrial History. They probably get a lot of people like that.
What would you say is your vision for the museum? Let's say in 10 years from now, how do you see the museum functioning in 10 years?
Glad you asked, Gary. So I just found out, and this would be like the biggest collecting win on the planet, but the general store is for sale. The general store in the center of Roebling. It's $800,000, so we're not going to be able to buy that anytime soon, but it's still Roebling was built before cars, so there's not a lot of like car infrastructure, so there's no parking. So I'm not really worried that it's going to sell quickly and it's going to get bought by like Starbucks or a warehouse or anything like that. But my dream is that people come to really like value Roebling as like a company town. I was gonna say the way that they value Hershey, but like no one's visiting Hershey for the company town history tour. They're going for the chocolate. But even with the house, like we are imagining it being sort of like New Jersey's Tenement Museum, if any of you have been to the Tenement Museum, where you're really centering sort of these everyday stories, but making these powerful connections to not only people's own lives, but also sort of like the national narratives. We can do it.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. I loved your presentation. Fantastic.
Cool.
Got a question for you about the Roman Catholic Church. What was the name of the church? And have you heard of one of the priests that served at Roebling by the name of Father Francis Gross?
So basically all the churches were Catholic in Roebling. There were several of them. So I know there's Hungarian Reformed Church, there's St. Mary's, which I think was the Romanian church, is the Romanian church, but I'm pretty sure they're all Byzantine Catholic. I think the only Roman Catholic one is Holy Assumption.
Okay.
And that one, I don't know about the name specifically Gross, but I have heard recently, as recent as last week, because my volunteer who grew up in town still goes to that church, and she said that all of the priests recently, in her memory since growing up, have had like thick Hungarian last names. So I don't know if Gross
I'm
would
going to
fit.
send you information.
Yeah.
Father Gross started out at Perth Amboy, and he was ethnic German, but he was Hungarian.
Ooh.
And during World War I, he had conflicted loyalties. And there was a riot that broke out in Perth Amboy because he was preaching to pray for the Kaiser. And eventually they ship him out of Perth Amboy and he lands in 1921 in Roebling.
That is really funny to me because they had like
And eventually
incredible.
he's either defrocked or leaves the priesthood. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, he's a humdinger. And he writes this pamphlet about justice for Hungary and Austria and Germany, and it's funded by the Third Reich. He dies in 1939. So I'll send you stuff.
I expect an email from you.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's an incredibly colorful character. So I was doing graduate work on Perth Amboy, and he popped up. And of course, I didn't get any cooperation from the Diocese of Trenton, about trying to find more. So whatever I found was, either in library collections or, newspaper databases.
Yeah, and so the Trenton they usually had like Roebling churches were usually satellite churches of the Trenton, so they sometimes shared priests and stuff. So there's probably a connection. And in Roebling, we know for sure. So we do a murder and mayhem tour. It's basically like true crime. It's not spooky. We don't want to like do something like too ghosty, but it's similar. And one of the things we kept coming up against in our research was like communist bomb plots. They were not real. They were just like assuming that the immigrants had these sort of like confusing loyalties because it was a 75% immigrant workforce. So they really didn't know what to do in World War I or World War II. It's really interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for a very fascinating presentation. In my years at Rutgers, we shepherded the huge Roebling family and company papers and all that, and were able to get a federal Save America's Treasures grant. But it's, company records is what company records are. You get to see what they produced and what it cost and all of that. But this really goes behind the scenes. So it's just a wonderful addition to what's already available. And I hope that you'll continue to work with the folks that are at Rutgers now. My wife grew up in Heading in Mansfield Township, right outside of Roebling, and she just had a comment about Holy Assumption.
Oh, well, my aunt went to Holy Assumption for a number of years. She was Irish, actually, but Holy Assumption was really close to Heading. So I remember that the priests there were Franciscans, and that on Sunday they had a Hungarian mass before they had an English mass. but that's really all I know about it.
That really is helpful because we're putting together a cemetery tour right now. And so all of the other churches I mentioned are on the other side of the tracks in this area that was outside of the company town. If you know anything about other company towns, so like in Pullman, they built one church and you all had to go to it. Like there was, so Roeblings had seen this go down in the late 1800s and said like, okay, we're not going to do any churches, you can do them, and sort of like gave them the freedom. But Holy Assumption is on this side of the tracks. And don't repeat this. I know this is being recorded. It's going to be repeated, but like it feels whiter. It feels like it's less Hungarian in some way. I don't know what who went there instead of here, if it's just that they were Byzantine on the other side, but they were Roman on this side. So it does kind of track that they had two separate masses, but we're learning more about that as we go. So that's
Yeah,
great.
well, it was a Hungarian mass. I never heard about having a Romanian mass.
Yeah.
So another thing, if you're interested in doing some comparison, New Jersey has another company town that's pretty well documented, and that's the town of Ogdensburg in Sussex County. It was where the New Jersey Zinc Company was located. And it was a mine. Several minerals were discovered there. Thomas Edison owned a lot of interest in that mine. And again, the papers are at Rutgers, and there are records of the company town. It was a classic company town, just like Roebling.
That's great.
The school, the hospital, the whole, I mean, it was everything. So, the paycheck would be given to the worker and then taken right back again for the rent and the school and what have you.
So I was actually at Rutgers looking through these records on Tuesday of this week. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. But I only got to go, they were dealing with some kind of flood situation. So I only got to go through one box. But I'm going to come back, Ron. I think you've got some good leads.
Great.
No one else is going yet. I'll ask a question. And Lynn, I apologize if I miss this. I have kids at home, so sometimes I get distracted for a minute here and there. Do you have a formal oral history program where you are recording in long form the memories of folks who lived there, or anyone with stories to share? You're coming across people who have stories to share in various ways.
So the previous board chair, she used to be a journalist and still a writer. So she led with Clifford Zink a real deal oral history project, and they did it in the lead up to opening the museum. So this was like 2006, 2007. And it seems like they just interviewed the oldest people in town, which is usually what happens with oral history. But they got like a former mayor and people who are really good storytellers that could tell a great Roebling story. But pretty much, except for one, I think all of those people have now passed away. So we are definitely ready for the next generation, the next step. And like Gary asked, like, are there people still living? We have sort of the people who worked one summer while they were going to college in the 60s, 70s. So they saw it, they knew their parents worked there. They do still have those stories of going to school and all of that in town, waiting for their fathers for lunchbox, all that cute stuff, whatever. But the people who are alive now also remember the mill closing in, a more present way. So we are like right on the precipice of new oral history. Because of the house project and the lack of staff, one thing that I have said for sure is like everything we do between now and 2028 has to in some way get us a step closer to opening the house. So this year we have a tenant who, the whole house was flipped in the 2000s. It's perfect. We're renting it out while we do the research. But in August and September, she is going to have moved out and we will not have the next tenant in. So we're going to have 2 months of open row house. And during that time, if you guys join our email list, you'll see we're going to have open houses to get people in to take a tour and to add that to our walking tour. But we're also going to try to do oral histories, maybe shorter versions. We're not really sure yet, of anyone who grew up or lived in a Roebling row house so that we can really capture. And we're kind of targeting the oral history rather than just like everybody. But like if we have the camera out, we might just invite everyone over too, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's a really good question. And even the visitors that come in have such good stories, and I'm so worried that we're gonna like lose track of them. They take my business card, I don't get their info, so I can't hunt them down and need them. So I think like if we even had like a recording, I know I've seen some museums sort of have a thing where people can make a recording like sort of on their own at the museum. There's got to be some way to collect that stuff from people. People really want to share it too.
Okay, other questions? You can unmute yourself and ask, or as I said, type it in the chat and I would be happy to read it for you. I'll ask another question then. Maybe people are formulating their thoughts. The dog, let's go back to the dog. What was his name again?
Brownie.
Brownie. So do you know, I know you don't know Brownie's life story, but do you know in general, were they using dogs on the premises for anything? Rodents? I mean, I don't know.
So dogs and cats, really interesting point. One thing, so I mentioned the diaries. We were able to get 2 giant buckets of family photos, and there are so many dogs in them. And for the other photos we've gotten from other people who live in Roebling, like it was such a dog town. I don't know that this is true everywhere. Did people love dogs this much in history? I'm learning so much. Definitely going down a rabbit hole. But so the company produced a magazine for workers, and in the 50s, one of the issues was like a reoccurring pet parade that they would do every year, where they would take pictures of workers' pets. So like parrots, like all kinds of stuff. And one of them was a dog, and it said like there was a word bubble that said, everyone knows Tricky, he's always down at the plant in Roebling. So like there is evidence that these dogs were actually down at the plant in Roebling. They probably were not working or anything like that. I don't know what they were doing. But Brownie specifically, buying things off eBay is not the greatest way to get like a clear provenance of the objects. But pretty much in every case, the person says, I bought it at an estate sale. Here's the name of the family. That's all we know. But with Brownie, there was a man's badge with it that I didn't win, and that guy worked in Trenton. So there is a good chance that Brownie was a Trenton mill dog, not a Roebling mill dog. And I don't know if we're ever gonna learn anything more about Brownie, but I think it would be like a really cute like mascot for the museum. If you ever see museums who do that, maybe we got to get a graphic designer.
I love it. Okay. Other questions? All right. Well, Gary, I think we're all set. What do you think?
I just want to thank Lynn for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Melissa, for coordinating this. And I hope to see folks at another one, probably in September.
And
Yeah, thanks so
remember,
much.
anyone has $800,000 lying around, Lynn needs a general store. And if that's a little too steep, $68. You could get her, right? What was that other thing you wanted on eBay?
Yeah, the
Lynn?
union card.
I'm just saying, everybody, think about it. Thank you
True.
so much, everyone. And Lynn, good luck with your work.
Thanks so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye, folks.
Thank you and good night.